What if death wasn't the end of suffering, but just the beginning? In the remote mountains of eastern Romania, there's a village that vanished from all maps after 1847. The locals whisper about a funeral that lasted 3 days and 3 nights, but nobody remembers who died. Tonight, we're diving into the twisted ritual that transformed an entire community into something that shouldn't exist. This isn't just another ghost story. This is about the price of disturbing forces older than civilization itself. The mountain village of Corbu had always been strange. Nestled between jagged peaks that seemed to scrape the belly of perpetually grey clouds, it was the kind of place where traditions ran deeper than the roots of its ancient oak trees. Father Dimitri had served this isolated community for 12 years, and in all that time, he'd never questioned why the villagers insisted on certain peculiarities. Every funeral in Corbu lasted exactly 3 days, not 2, not 4, always 3. The body would be placed in the center of the village square, surrounded by a perfect circle of black candles that never seemed to burn down. The entire population, all 67 souls, would maintain a continuous vigil, taking turns to ensure someone was always watching, always chanting in a dialect so old that even Dimitri couldn't translate it. But this October morning was different. Dimitri woke to the sound of those ancient words drifting through his window, carried on air that tasted of copper and decay. He dressed quickly, his hands trembling as he fastened his collar. There had been no death in the village. No one was sick. No one was even particularly old. So why were they preparing for a funeral? As he stepped outside, the sight that greeted him made his blood freeze in his veins. There, in the center of the square, lay an ornate coffin he'd never seen before. It was carved from wood so dark it seemed to absorb light, decorated with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The villagers stood in their perfect circle, their faces blank, their mouths moving in that terrible rhythmic chant. "Maria," he called to the baker's wife, a woman who usually greeted him with warm smiles and fresh bread. She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the coffin, pupils dilated so wide they looked like black holes in her skull. One by one, Dimitri approached the villagers he'd known for over a decade. Elena, who taught the children. Petru, the blacksmith who'd repaired. The church bell just last week. Old Anna, who made the most beautiful embroidery in 3 counties. None of them acknowledged his presence. They simply stood there, chanting words that seemed to crawl into his ears and nest in his brain like parasites. The coffin's lid was slightly ajar. Against every instinct screaming at him to run, Dimitri approached it. His footsteps echoed strangely in the square, as if the ground beneath was hollow. The closer he got, the more the air around him seemed to thicken, pressing against his lungs like invisible hands. He reached the coffin and peered inside. It was empty, but somehow, impossibly, he could hear breathing coming from within. 3 days passed, though Dimitri couldn't be sure if time was moving normally anymore. The sun seemed to hang in the same position in the sky, casting shadows that pointed in directions that defied logic. The villagers never stopped their vigil, never ate, never drank, never even blinked. Their skin had taken on a waxy, translucent quality, as if they were slowly becoming something else. And the breathing from the empty coffin had grown louder. On what might have been the 3rd night, though the darkness felt older and deeper than any natural night, Dimitri finally understood. He'd found his grandmother's journal, hidden beneath loose floorboards in the church's basement. The pages were yellow and brittle, filled with her spidery handwriting in Old Romanian. The village had made a pact generations ago, a bargain with something that lived in the spaces between life and death. In exchange for protection from plague, famine, and war, they would offer it the most precious thing they possessed when the time came. The time had come, The entity didn't want their crops or their gold. It wanted their existence itself, not their lives, but their right to live. The funeral wasn't for someone who had died. It was for the village itself, for the world of the living that Corbu was leaving behind. As Dimitri read the final entries, he realized his grandmother had participated in this same ritual 50 years ago. Another empty coffin, another 3-day vigil. But somehow, some of the villagers had been released, allowed to continue existing in this strange liminal state between life and death. The current residents weren't the original villagers at all. They were the echoes, the impressions left behind by people who had traded their mortality for something far worse. And now it was happening again. The breathing from the coffin had synchronized with his own heartbeat. When he looked up from the journal, Dimitri saw that all 67 villagers had turned to face him. Their eyes were no longer eyes at all, but deep, dark holes that seemed to stretch infinitely inward. In perfect unison, they spoke his name. But it wasn't the name his parents had given him. It was a name in that ancient language, a name that felt like it had always belonged to him, carved into his soul before he was born. Dimitri walked toward the coffin. His legs moved without his permission, carrying him forward while his mind screamed in protest. As he approached, the lid swung open wider, revealing not emptiness, but a void so complete it made his eyes water. The villagers' chanting reached a crescendo as he climbed into the coffin. The moment his body touched the ancient wood, he understood everything. The village wasn't being buried, it was being reborn. Every 50 years the cycle repeated. New faces, new names, but the same eternal vigil, the same impossible existence between worlds. As the lid closed above him, Dimitri heard new voices joining the chant. Travelers who had been drawn to the village, just as he had been drawn 12 years ago. Just as the next priest would be drawn in another 12 years. The funeral would begin again tomorrow, but this time, Father Dimitri would be one of the ones. Standing vigil, his eyes hollow, his mouth forming words in a language older than human civilization. And somewhere in the distance, another empty coffin was already being carved. If this story left you questioning what lies beyond the veil of death, smash that like button and subscribe for more tales that blur the line between nightmare and reality. Share this with someone brave enough to handle the truth about what lurks in forgotten places. What do you think really happened in Corbu? Have you ever encountered a place that felt like it existed outside of normal time? Drop your theories and experiences in the comments below. But be warned, some stories have a way of becoming true when spoken aloud. Until next time, remember, some traditions are kept alive for very good reasons, and some are kept alive by things that should have died long ago.